Hello and welcome to the Heaven Bound Sunday School class at the First General Baptist Church in Truman. We'll read scripture from the 25th chapter of Genesis. Now, last week we studied about how God had promised Abram that he would be the father of a great nation. His offspring would number the stars in the sky and the dust in the ground. Since the last week's scripture, his name has been changed to Abraham, and we find out that Abraham and Sarah did have a son named Isaac, and he would further along God's promise to make Abraham the father of a great nation. That scripture comes from Genesis 25th, starting in verse 19. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Paddan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. The Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After that, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to them. The boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau came in from the open country, famished. He said to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that red stew. I'm famished." That's why he was also called Edom. Jacob replied, "First sell me your birthright." "Look, I am about to die," Esau said. "What good is the birthright to me?" But Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, then got up and left. Now Isaac and his wife Rebekah, he was 40 years old. That's what the scripture says when they got married. And much like Abraham and Sarah, they were married quite a few years and didn't have any children. So just like his father, before him, Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife. If you recall, that's what Abraham did in behalf of Sarah. He prayed to the Lord, scripture says, because she was childless. And the Lord answered this prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant. Now, during her pregnancy, it says the babies jostled each other. And Rebekah went to the Lord to ask just what was going on in her womb. And God answered and that there was going to be two nations in her womb and two peoples, and they would be separated, kind of setting the beginning of what was going to happen after the two boys were born and eventually went their separate ways, and their descendants continued also to fight. But now the word jostled is a Hebrew word that's fairly common in the Old Testament, but its rare construction in this verse alludes to conflict that's more intense than ordinarily expected. Rebekah's physical distress was more than would be anticipated by a pregnant woman. Something deeper and more serious was at hand. And so she inquired of the Lord, and as I said earlier, what the Lord replied. But one thing he said that stands out, it says, "One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." So there was going to be conflict between the sons, and there was going to be conflict between their descendants. Now, the fact that the older would serve the younger, that's contrary to their culture and tradition of the society at that time. The oldest son always had special rights and privileges. Now, thankfully, God is not bound by socially constructed standards. God displays His grace here and throughout the Bible. God chooses whom He will favor. His grace is not for the deserving or those who just happen to be born first. It's for whosoever God decides. Now, Rebekah gave birth to the twins. Now, the first child to be born had a red complexion, had hair all over his body, and he was named Esau. And the second baby that came out grasping at Esau's heel. He was given the name Jacob because translated in Hebrew, there's several different translations. One is heel, another is grasping. He was grasping at the heel. And the third one is trickery. And that'll come into play later on in their lives as we find that Jacob was kind of a deceitful person. We'll leave it at that. It says Isaac was 60 years old when they were born. So he had spent 20 years waiting for the birth of his children. Now Esau and Jacob couldn't be any more unalike. Esau was an outdoorsman. He was a hunter, very skillful, knew all about the open country, provided food for the family. He knew all about the land's resources. He'd rather be out hunting than at home. Whereas Jacob, he didn't like to be out in the country. He didn't like to hunt. He didn't like to do any of the things that Esau did. He was content to be at home, what we'd call today a homebody. So the verse 28, very important verse, Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. So there was a division among the married couple about which child they like best, is the only way I know how to put it, and that will certainly come into play in future events. So this story comes about that Jacob was at home cooking some stew. Esau had been out on the open country hunting, got tired. Scripture says he was famished. He says to Jacob, "Quick, let me have some of that stew. I'm famished." I know we have all at one time or another said things similar to that. "I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Quickly, fix me something. I'm hungry." Kind of exaggerating the situation. But that's what Esau did. So Jacob, being a very loving brother, I say that with tongue in cheek, he actually says, "First, sell me your birthright." In other words, yeah, you can have some stew, but it's going to cost you. It's going to be a very expensive bowl of stew. You sell me your birthright. Now Esau, he says, "Hey, I'm about to die. What good is a birthright to me?" Now, really, was he about to die? Was he that hungry? Like I said, sometimes we tend to exaggerate. But nevertheless, he thought he was dying of hunger. Now his pleading made him appear impulsive as he focused on immediate physical concerns. His request could be read as exasperated begging. Instead of making a level-headed request, Esau sounded like a beggar. Jacob, on the other hand, very calm, very manipulative, thinking probably, now is my chance to do something. I can get that birthright. So he says, let me have that birthright, sell it to me, and you can have this stew. Esau agreed to it, but Jacob even says, "Swear an oath to me that I can have that birthright." Now, the firstborn's birthright usually, and probably in this case, would include a double portion of the father's estate. Isaac was a very wealthy man. Therefore, this birthright would have been very sizable and very important to Jacob in his future life. So Jacob says, "Swear to me first." So Esau swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Now, Esau's desire for immediate gratification led him to disregard the most important earthly thing that was his to lose, his birthright. Esau was so focused on immediate profit and pleasure that he gave up a lifelong blessing. Now, to swear on the oath, Esau would risk divine judgment, according to the custom of that time, if he should later try to break this agreement or say, no, I didn't do it. And to add to that, oaths were very common at that time. Now, Esau got some bread and some stew. He ate it, he drank, he left. Esau got temporary relief. He got temporary relief from his hunger, and Jacob got a permanent blessing, that birthright. If you recall earlier, when they were still in the womb, God told Rebekah the older brother would be at the mercy of the younger. He would serve the younger. And that's exactly what's happening. Now, readers and listeners should be unimpressed with the attitudes and the actions of the individuals described in this lesson. Isaac and Rebekah each favored one of their sons over the other. Esau desired immediate relief over long-term benefits. Jacob schemed and manipulated his brother for personal gain. A story that began with God's love and power transitions into a story of people pursuing their own interests. However, we need not idealize any one human character because the Lord is the protagonist of this story. He alone can make good out of less than ideal circumstances and less than ideal people. God worked through this deeply flawed family, and he will work in the lives of all people whom he has called. People of God should not strive to force his hand. Instead, we should trust that his plans and purposes will be fulfilled regardless of any attempts to circumvent or force those plans.